The prairie wind rolled steady across the open plains, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and juniper. Clara Mabin stood still in her wedding dress, ivory lace tinged with earth, and watched the horizon with calm eyes that belied the flutter in her chest. Behind her, the small congregation, neighbors, ranch hands, townsfolk, stood in a horseshoe of rough boots and Sunday bests, waiting for the vows to be spoken beneath the rising sun. Jacob Hollis held her hands, roughened by years of wrangling cattle, but trembling now with something softer than strength. He was tall and broad and bearded, with laughter lines that hinted at years of kindness. Clara's heart was a steady thrum beneath her ribs. Missouri seemed a lifetime away. Here, under the wide skies of Dry Knife, they would begin again. The preacher cleared his throat. "Do you, Jacob?" A distant rumble interrupted him. Not thunder. Hooves. People turned, shielding their eyes against the glare. Riders. 6 of them, maybe 7, fanning out like wolves across the rise. Their coats were long, dust-caked. Their horses foamed at the mouth from the ride. One wore a red scarf. The others wore scorn like second skin. Jacob stepped forward before anyone else could move. "Clara," he murmured, pressing her back gently behind him. "Stay low." The preacher dropped his Bible. Someone screamed. One of the horses reared. The riders didn't slow. They came straight through the gathering like they owned the earth it stood on. One snatched a bottle of whiskey from a table. Another fired into the air, startling the mule tied near the altar. The leader, a man with cold eyes and a slow, smug grin, dismounted and looked around. His voice was calm. "Name's Wade Coyle. This here's a warning. Dry Knife's due for a change in ownership. Taxes, you might say." "You're not taking anything," Jacob said. He stood square, unarmed but unmoved. Wade studied him. "You Hollis?" "I am." Wade nodded once. "Shame." The gunshot cracked like a whip. Clara didn't scream, not at first. She just dropped to her knees beside Jacob as he hit the dirt, red blooming across his chest like a rose in spring. His eyes found hers once, wide with pain but still trying to reassure. Then they didn't move again. The outlaws took what they wanted: food, a horse, a pair of boots from a dead man's feet, and left in a trail of dust and mockery. Someone tried to stop them and was thrown against a wagon wheel. No one fired back. Not the sheriff. Not the preacher. Not a soul. Clara sat in the dirt, Jacob's head in her lap, her wedding dress soaked through with his blood. It didn't feel like grief yet. Not exactly. It felt like silence, long and deep, pressing on her ears from inside. They buried him the next day behind the chapel, where the land tilted toward the creek. Clara did most of the digging. When the preacher came to help, she didn't speak. When he tried to say a few words over the grave, she simply looked at him until he stopped. The wind kept blowing. For days, the town whispered, "That poor woman. That wicked gang." The sheriff paced but never saddled his horse. A few men tried to organize a posse, but found excuses by evening. Wade Coyle had 30 men in the hills and no conscience. Dry Knife folded in on itself, like a frightened dog. Clara didn't weep. She stacked Jacob's tools by the barn, mended the loose boards in the chicken coop, and left her wedding dress drying on the line until the blood baked into the lace. She wore Jacob's coat at night and carried a lantern through the fields they'd once dreamed of planting. When folks asked what she was going to do now, she just said, "Stay." They told her it wasn't safe, that she ought to go back east, that a woman alone, widowed, land-rich, and unprotected, wasn't long for this place. Clara didn't argue. She simply bought a box of cartridges from the general store, a second-hand revolver with a notch already in the grip, and asked if anyone knew where she could find Ezra Whitlock. Most folks wouldn't go near Ezra. Said he was half mad, half legend, used to ride with the Buffalo Soldiers until something in him broke loose, lived near the dry ravine, past the bluff where snakes coiled in the shade. But Clara went anyway, walking the miles alone with a satchel and quiet purpose. She returned that night with a blackened handkerchief around her wrist and eyes that no longer blinked at gunfire. The town stopped asking questions. A month passed. Then 2. The grass turned gold. The wind shifted. And though Dry Knife still feared the hills, and the men who rode them. Some whispered that the land hadn't gone silent. It had just chosen a new keeper. Clara walked it every morning. She knew its stones, its shade, its hidden draws where water pooled and riders could wait. She marked them with care. She started talking to the sheriff less and listening to the land more. At Jacob's grave, she stood one evening as dusk melted over the ridge. She placed a single spent casing on the headstone and said nothing at all. Behind her, the wind answered for him. And far off, from the edge of nowhere, a coyote howled like it was mourning or warning, or maybe both. The plains had taken Jacob, but they had not broken Clara. They had revealed her. The mornings came colder now. Clara rose before the sun, her breath fogging in the dark as she stepped into Jacob's boots. The house was still mostly bones, walls patched with tarp, the roof thin in places, but she made coffee on the iron stove and drank it black, watching the horizon turn gold. The land was as vast and empty as ever, but Clara had begun to fill it with motion, mending fence posts, hauling water, driving the cattle left behind by neighbors too frightened to stay. She didn't speak much, and when she did, it was often to herself or to the land. She'd come to understand its temperament, the soft give of dirt underfoot, the sting of nettles near the ravine, the rhythm of winds that bent the scrubgrass low when storms threatened. Her muscles had hardened, her hands cracked, her hair, once worn long and brushed smooth, was tied up now beneath Jacob's old hat. Ezra Whitlock arrived without announcement one dusk, leaning on a twisted cane, a roll-your-own cigarette dangling from his lip. His skin was deep-lined and dark, his eyes too sharp for a man so old. He said nothing at first, just watched Clara split a stack of kindling with clean, decisive strikes. "You're not building a fire," he said. "No," Clara replied. "I'm building muscle." Ezra grunted approval and sat on a stump like he meant to stay a while. "You come to me with your pain in your pocket, thinking I'd show you how to shoot straight. I showed you. Now you got to decide what for." Clara didn't answer. She finished splitting the last log and wiped her brow with her sleeve. Ezra's voice softened. "Killing's not a gift. It's a debt." "I'm not here to kill," Clara said. "I'm here to survive." He looked at her long, then nodded once. "Same thing out here." He came back the next day, and the day after that. He brought old maps, faded cartridges, and a rifle long as his arm. He showed her how to breathe with the wind, how to track a rider by the angle of broken sage, how to tell a bluff from a trap. She was a quick learner, disciplined. Her mind caught patterns others missed. But it was more than technique. Ezra saw it in her, the same hard clarity he'd once seen in officers too young for their scars. She didn't flinch. She didn't brag. She listened. In town, the air grew brittle with fear. A ranch 2 valleys east had burned. A family disappeared. Some said they fled. Others said the Red Valley gang left no witnesses. The sheriff boarded up his own windows and started drinking before noon. The mayor called a meeting in the church. Clara rode in just before it began, dust rising behind her like smoke. She sat in the back, hat low, silent. "We can't face them," the mayor declared. "Not directly. They outnumber us 5-1. "Then we pay," someone offered. "Let them take what they want. Keep our heads down." Clara stood. Her voice was steady, not loud, but it carried. "You pay once, you pay forever." All eyes turned to her. A few blinked. Most looked away. "You're not sheriff," the mayor said. "No," Clara replied, "but he won't be stopping them." The sheriff didn't argue. He just drank from a tin cup and muttered something about keeping his boots dry. "I'm not asking you to fight," Clara said, scanning the room. "I'm telling you what's coming. And when it does, you'll need more than prayers and empty hands." She walked out before they could answer, her boots echoing on the chapel floor. Ezra waited outside, you expecting them to follow. "No," she said, "but I needed them to hear me say it." Later, back on the ranch, she studied the map Ezra unrolled across the kitchen table. Lobo Canyon, a narrow, twisting stretch of rock and shadow, deep enough to trap a man and high enough to kill him from above. "They rest there," Ezra said, tapping the canyon's bend, week before each full moon. "I've watched them. They don't expect trouble that far from town. Clara traced the path with her finger. How do we cut off the retreat? Explosives, Ezra said, and a fast horse. They began to plan, not vengeance, but a reckoning. She rode farther each day, marking trails, counting hoofprints, noting shifts in the herd. She bought supplies from the store without fanfare: nails, saltpeter, jugs of kerosene. When asked, she said she was patching the barn. She practiced with the rifle until her shoulder bruised. She placed tin cans on fence posts, then rocks, then coins, and split each with precision. Ezra showed her how to reload in the dark. She didn't sleep much. Dreams didn't visit her anymore, only strategy. One evening, as the sun bled across the plains, Ezra leaned on the porch rail beside her. "You know," he said, "most folks call what you're doing madness." Clara tilted her head, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Then they never lost everything worth living for," she said. Ezra chuckled, dry as sand. "You don't talk like a schoolteacher no more." "I don't feel like one." "You feel like—" Clara thought for a moment. "Like the land. Quiet, but waiting." Ezra looked at her then, with something close to respect, or perhaps fear. He taught her to fire, to hunt, to track. But what grew in Clara had no name. It was forged from grief and tempered by labor. It was not rage. It was something older. The wind picked up. From the ridge, a hawk shrieked and soared into the falling light. Clara watched it vanish into the dusk. "They think I'm alone," she said. Ezra followed her gaze. "They're wrong." And the fire in her eyes didn't flicker. It only spread. The storm came in like a slow-footed beast, dragging heavy clouds across the horizon. Clara stood at the edge of the bluff, watching Lobo Canyon far below. The wind bit through her coat and tugged at her scarf, but she remained still. In the distance, smoke curled into the sky, lazy, unbothered, rising from the Outlaw's camp nestled in the gorge. Thunder rumbled overhead, but the kind that mattered was below. Hooves clashing on stone, laughter echoing off canyon walls, boots stomping through scrub as the Red Valley gang made their preparations. Clara had timed it right. The full moon was 2 days off, and Wade Coyle's men were celebrating their latest raid with stolen whiskey and a false sense of safety. She returned to the shack, tucked behind the ridge. Ezra was there, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. He didn't look up. "They're in," Clara said. "All of them." Ezra nodded once. "Explosives set." Clara unrolled the fuse line, checked the coil, then lit a lantern. "Enough to bury half the canyon if we need to. The ridge overlooks narrow. Once they come up, they'll bottle themselves in." Ezra stood and buckled his belt. Then all that's left is the noise. The plan was brutal, simple, and final. They would trap Wade's gang in the pass by collapsing the western slope behind them, then pick them off one by one from the high ground. Clara would draw them in, riding fast and loud, dragging their attention uphill, while Ezra circled behind to cut down stragglers. Clara didn't tremble as she saddled the black mare. The rifle sat in its leather scabbard, her revolver tied low on her hip. A blade lay strapped to her boot, another in the saddlebag. She was no longer the schoolteacher who arrived in dry knife, with ribbon in her hair. She had become the storm. Midnight fell hard and heavy. Clouds hid the moon. The canyon shimmered with firelight from below, shadows dancing like ghosts on the canyon walls. Clara rode in at a gallop, hollering loud and wild. The gang shouted in confusion. Bottles dropped. Men scrambled for guns. A few recognized her silhouette in the fire's glow. "It's her," someone yelled. "The widow." Then the charges blew. The western cliff roared as stone and sand collapsed. Dust swallowed the back end of the canyon, sealing the retreat. Horses screamed. Men stumbled. The world tipped sideways with the force of it. Clara wheeled hard and disappeared behind the next ridge. She dismounted and climbed the slope fast, breath steady, legs sure. From the overlook above, she had sight lines to every rock below. She pulled the rifle free and took aim. The first man dropped before he spotted her. The second never had time to shout. She moved with the wind, eyes scanning, fingers calm. Ezra's shots echoed from the south wall, clean, deliberate. Panic bloomed in the canyon like wildfire. The outlaws scattered, but the walls were too steep and the passage blocked. One tried to climb, fell back screaming. Another grabbed a torch and swung it like a club, as if fire could fight what he couldn't see. Wade Coyle stepped into the open, pistol in hand. He was shouting orders no one followed, his coat flapping like a banner in a wind that didn't care. "Come down, Clara," he roared. "You want blood? Come take mine." She didn't speak. She fired. The bullet clipped his arm, spun him sideways. He ducked behind a boulder. "You think this is justice? You think they'll remember your name when this land swallows you?" Clara slid another round into the chamber. Jacob Hollis died like a man. Wade snarled, "What are you, woman?" She whispered it to herself before pulling the trigger. "I'm what's left when men like you burn everything else down." Her shot struck stone, then shoulder. Wade cursed and stumbled, bleeding, slipping on the dirt. Ezra climbed into view across the canyon, rifle still smoking. His silhouette, dark against the dawn light, looked 10 feet tall. "Let him run," he said. "Let him see what thunder looks like when it walks upright." But Clara descended. She dropped into the canyon, boots crunching the loose gravel. Her revolver was drawn. The gang was broken, the few who still lived limping or surrendering their weapons. Some sobbed. Others begged. She passed them like smoke, eyes locked on Wade as he crawled toward a fallen horse. "No," she said. He turned, hand outstretched. "Wait." The gun's report silenced the canyon. Wade fell back, eyes open, blood pooling beneath his coat. Clara stood over him for a long time. She didn't look away until he stopped breathing. By the time the sun rose over Lobo Canyon, it was quiet again. Ezra joined her, looking over the bodies, the busted supplies, the trail of blood that marked the gang's last ride. "You did it," he said. "No," Clara replied. "The land did. I just gave it a voice." Ezra nodded, then gestured to the canyon mouth. "They'll come soon, to see what happened. Some will call it justice. Some will call it murder." Clara holstered her gun. "Let them call it whatever they like, but they'll know one thing for certain." "What's that?" She stayed. The sun had barely risen when the first of the curious arrived at Lobo Canyon. A small group of men, ragged and unsure, emerged from the eastern trail, their horses picking their way through the loose gravel. They were locals, ranchers, drifters, men who had lived under the threat of the Red Valley Gang for far too long. But today there was something different in the air, a heaviness like the calm before a storm. Clara stood at the canyon's edge, her rifle resting on the ground beside her, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Ezra leaned against a rock, arms crossed, watching her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The men on horseback slowed as they approached the wreckage of the camp, their eyes scanning the bodies scattered across the ground. Clara didn't flinch when one of them saw Wade's body, sprawled out in the dirt, blood still pooling around him. She had no need to look. She knew what they would see. One of the riders, a grizzled man with a salt and pepper beard, dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the sand. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Clara didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head, letting the weight of her silence settle between them. Her hands were calm, no tremble or hesitation. She wasn't sure if they were waiting for her permission or for a sign that what she'd done could be understood. "They won't be back," she said finally, her voice carrying the surety of someone who had come to terms with what had been done. "The land's rid of them." The man nodded, his eyes hardening as he looked over the canyon floor. "You killed them all." "I killed the ones who needed killing," Clara replied, her gaze never wavering. Ezra pushed off the rock and came to stand beside her. "The rest of them won't bother you, Clara. No one will." His voice was quiet but firm, like a promise spoken after a hard truth had been laid out. The riders exchanged glances, some uneasy, others relieved, but all of them uncertain. Clara's reputation had grown with each passing day, though it was still a tale half-formed, one that some chose to ignore. Some townsfolk still whispered that she was no more than a widow lost to grief, a woman who had snapped in the face of loss. But now there was more. Her name, spoken with reverence or fear, would travel fast, whether she wanted it to or not. The bearded man stepped forward. "What now?" Clara stood tall, shoulders squared beneath her coat. Now I keep what's mine. He seemed to understand the weight of her words. The others, not so much. They looked at each other with uncertainty, as if waiting for her to explain further. But there was nothing left to explain. Her intentions had been made clear in every rifle shot, in every calculated move. She had become more than a widow, more than a survivor. She was the land's reckoning. Ezra turned and walked away, his voice low as he spoke to one of the men who had joined them. Get the bodies out of here. Bury them before the vultures take flight. Clara watched him go, then turned back to the riders who remained. They were still waiting, still hoping for an answer. But Clara wasn't their salvation, and she wasn't about to become their hero. I'm not here to save you, she said, her words quiet but resolute. You're all going to have to learn how to save yourselves. The silence that followed hung heavy, thick with an understanding they had not yet earned. I've buried enough, she added, looking them over one by one, as if measuring their worth. Now, it's your turn to bury what's left of your fear. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the edge of the canyon, where the sun was beginning to rise over the land she had claimed as her own. Behind her, the men muttered among themselves, but Clara didn't listen. The world had changed. The land had changed, and she had changed with it. As she moved, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of earth and sage, the breath of the plains whispering in her ears. The old stories told of women who became legends, not because of their strength or their guns, but because of their will. Clara was no different. She was the woman who stayed, the one who refused to leave what was hers, no matter the cost. And that was enough. She stopped at the ridge where Jacob had once stood, where they had dreamed of a future together, a future that had been torn away in one brutal, fiery night. She could still see the memory of his face, half hidden by the shadows of the past, but it was fading now. There was no place for ghosts on this land, no room for them in her heart. She reached down, her fingers brushing against the dry earth. I'll finish it, she whispered, though no one was there to hear. Behind her, the riders were leaving, their horses' hooves kicking up the dust as they made their way back to town, to homes they had not built, to lives they had yet to understand. Clara didn't look back at them. She had made her mark on this land. It was done. The silence stretched out before her, but now it was different. It wasn't the emptiness of loss. It was the quiet of something that had been earned, the peace that came only after a fight, the calm that followed the storm. And for Clara, the woman who stayed, that peace was enough.